This program features interviews covering subjects that some listeners may find triggering. Topics that could be discussed include suicide, self-harm, drug addiction, mental illness, domestic violence, and gang violence. Opinions expressed here on the Why You Crying Fu podcast do not represent Reshaping Identity, 805, or any supporting organizations. This program is made possible and part of the state-funded California Creative Corps through a grant awarded by the California Arts Council and administered locally by the Ventura County Arts Council.
Hello, everybody. I'm Fernando Albert Salinas, and this is the Why You Crying Fool podcast. I'm here with Matthew Brackett. Matthew, will you say Why You Crying Fool for me, and just so we can hear you ask the question?
Yes, Fernando. Why you crying for?
Oh, man, I don't know why you have to hurt me like that. That's a tough question. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. I believe you're going to begin with a poem, and we'll take it away from there.
I will. This is a poem that's dedicated to the Marines and sailors that I served as a chaplain. But the title of your podcast made me think of this. And because of the importance of crying, the importance of tears. And this was a sort of a gift when I finished my active duty as a chaplain, that it summarizes in a certain way what a chaplain does, but also what people go through and the power of a tear. And so it begins: the tear of a Marine. It's not often seen. Far out of sight in the dark of night, a timid tear will lean on the cheek of a Marine. A tear, it's a language so refined that words cannot make up their mind. The body and the spirit desire to express, and struggling words only say less. But the timid tear says it all, as from your eye does fall. And as a chaplain, I was given the grace to sit in that sacred space, witnessing day after day the tear that words can't say. That powerful drop does speak. It is courageous. It isn't weak. A Marine trying to be strong, turning a tear into a song. Semper Fi, Marine. When from your heart it leaks that single drop, a story speaks. It tells of what is meaningful to you, of what is sacred too. What you lost, who you miss, who you lost, or who you no longer kiss. That tear tells of a roadblock, of feeling stuck. And inside your heart you scream, oh, the memories of the war, the tragedies of that tour. My brothers and sisters fell beside me. The guilt and what ifs don't let me free. The visions of combat fill my head. The pain makes me wish I was dead. That tear says that life is heavy, home is crazy. I got NJP'd. My future looks hazy. My career is on the line, or before the Corps, I was fine. My baby was up all night crying. The recruiter may have been lying. The dad left me and didn't want me. My mom walked away from me and family. The day I held my dying brother, or when a girl left me for another. When suicide took the life of my friend, when that abuse never seemed to end. Missing family, friends, missing home. Sitting here surrounded, but feeling alone. And so that tear of a Marine, it's not often seen. In the dark of a night, far out of sight, that timid tear, it will lean on the cheek of a Marine. Let that tear fall, Marine. Let it fall. Let it express it all. Let that tear will open up your soul. The drop you lose will fill that hole. That tear will water the earth. And the timid tear will give birth. And I assure you that what will come forth is better than who you were before, and remind you of the hopes that are in store. So honor your tear. Have no fear. Courageously let it fall. Face your truths. Face them all. And commit to hear the meaning that a single tear is concealing. Care for your humanity, Marine. And your humanity will care for you. And it will care for your loved ones too. Better is our country. Better is the core when you know what and who you live for. But more importantly, better are you when you to yourself are true, to being the best human possible. That indeed is truly plausible. You will still wear green. You will look mean, strong, and lean. And you will forever be a United States Marine.
Well done.
Those are just a few thoughts that in a moment of inspiration, I was able to pen in gratitude for my Marines and sailors for allowing me into that sacred space to share in their lives. Along the topic of this show, this podcast is, again, there's a culture there where dealing with yourself or talking about really what you're going through, vulnerability and things like that, it's seen as weakness, and weakness is unacceptable. And so therefore it's almost like being human or dealing with aspects of our humanity is unacceptable. And over time, as you can imagine, that can do a lot of damage in us as human beings. Now, I referred to this culture, but there's so many different cultures that are very similar. Whether it be faith-based cultures, whether it be church cultures, whether it be certain country cultures, whether it be what also surrounds us as men and males, right? And this erroneous thought around dealing with our emotions and dealing with tears and dealing with what we go through, and the natural tendency that we have to evade, to avoid, because it's considered what we might think as tougher or more manly thing to do, or the better thing to do, but it can end up being the more unhealthy thing to do, and it ends up the price can be very high that we have to pay later on. And this has a lot to do with my own story, where I went, because as I was in ministry, I was a Catholic priest for 20 years. And so again, in that context, and the religious group that I was part of, is sort of something created a disconnect with your emotional life, because there was an overemphasis on the spiritual. And so it's sort of like the dealing with your humanity was seen as a second category. You don't really have to, you over spiritualize things, and everything has its place. But whenever we bring things to extremes, whether it be in a military culture, whether it be in a corporate culture, whether it be in a faith-based culture, like this, the extremes are never healthy. And so this led me, first of all, to disconnect from certain elements of my humanity. And then this erroneous thought that, well, I can't be real, sort of, I can't have problems because I have to be what I represent for so many other people. And then also I'm there, you're there to serve other people, you're there to care for other people. And you almost get to this comfortable spot where, well, the less I have to deal with my stuff, the better. The more I can fill that void with helping other people, and the better and the more comfortable. It's not the better, but it works for a while. And then at some point, things start to fall apart. So I share that just a little bit part of my story, and then I haven't let you ask some questions.
Sure. So I guess you've given us some context and why you wrote the poem and being part of the church. And this is a topic that I find very interesting, this idea that when we serve other people, when we're in a place of service, it's very rewarding. And often I think people can do it to a point where they lose themselves and they sacrifice their own life, and maybe they've helped 5,000 families, but their family at home is in a state of dysfunction. And so and also that when you speak about the physical way that we engage with other people through the five senses, let's say, we often forget that without the spiritual, the things that we cannot see, we would not exist and survive. We talk about if I can't touch it, if I can't feel it, it doesn't exist. However, if I can't see it, but breathing is an example of one thing that I
Of
cannot
course.
touch or feel, but keeps me going, keeps me alive. And breath is almost spiritual to me right now in my path of learning and understanding the world. So
Thank you for that. Yes, there's so many invisibles to the human existence. And I think when we don't pay attention to those, well, we do ourselves a great disservice. In in today's day and age where we want to be very scientific and we want to be data driven and we want to be able to tangibles and measurables and touchables, yes, that has its place. But that's not the only way to explain human existence, because there's so many invisibles and intangibles. And that's what makes our existence so beautiful. And so complex, but beautifully complex. And also there's a certain mystery about life. And I think there's something very attractive and beautiful about that, because there's this mystery that draws us. And the mystery, is something invisible, something that's veiled. And it draws us to always discover more. Even just, for ourselves. We are, as human beings, we are mysteries unto ourselves. And so we're on a journey also of self-discovery. And then the others they are also mysteries to me. And so we're on a journey of other discovery. And then something else that happens in the human dynamic is that I discover the way I discover myself is through my relationship with others. So I discover myself through you, Fernando, through your eyes. I can see elements of myself that maybe I wouldn't have seen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going on a few tangents here, but what you've said just makes me think about all of these things and to share them with you and with your audience.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because one of the things that have been a big complaint in our society today is the use of cell phones and these smart computers, and how the mystery of life has been lost in many ways because we can explore on a device. And it is this simulation, in a sense, that we're watching other people's lives and hiking mountains and living wealthy lives or struggling through depression, whatever it may be. We're experiencing so much without moving, without actually interacting in the world. And so that is, when you speak about the mystery, it makes me think of boredom. If my son says, boredom, I'm bored, Dad, I'm thinking, how can you be bored? He doesn't say it anymore, but I remember when he was younger, I
Right.
asked myself, how could you be bored when this is such a marvelous place to explore and learn more about yourself and others.
Mm.
So
Yes.
in your work, can you, let's see, so you were working within the church, and then there must have been a moment when you decided, I want to be doing something else.
Yeah. I don't know if there was one specific moment. For me, it was a journey. It was something what I like to say is live your way to the answer. So I was living my way to the answers, discerning my way to the answers, and paying attention to a lot of things that were going on in my life, that were going, and sort of having a rereading of my past in light of the present, trying to understand my past and how it got me to my present, and just questioning, hopefully in a healthy way, a lot of the things, and then in light of my future, in light of the present, or how do I want to live the present in light of the future? Where does this lead me now? So very complex process, very complex decisions. First of all, because I took what I was doing, in ministry, it's a very serious commitment, and there's so many elements that are so beautiful about it, but it has to be the right place for you, right? And I tried to make it fit and make it work for a long time. And I think that just it took its toll on me. And so I had to, for the sake of honesty, I had to sort of put everything on the table and reevaluate and make the best, and as much as we can as human beings, to make the best decision and moving forward.
How long of a commitment is it to even become
So Catholic priest,
priest?
there's two types of priests, good and bad. None of there's priests that are diocesan priests, well, getting into all the weeds, but diocesan priests, and then priests that are part of a religious order, religious group, right? So what they're called secular priests, religious priests. We might think of Benedictines, we might think of Dominicans, we might think of Jesuits. So those what will be, they're priests that are part of a religious group inside the church. So that have a specific mission, whether it's education or whether it's evangelization, or whether the mission territory, whatever it is. The diocesan priest works, the commitments, there's certain commitments that are the same, there's other commitments that are different. And the diocesan priest works more in a geographical area and would work usually for a bishop. Right, so it's very geographical. These other religious groups are usually international organizations, and so you move around a lot more. So I moved around a lot more. I worked in a lot of different countries, in different cultures, which is again fascinating experience and so enriching in my journey. So those are the two types of in a priest. There's always this training. Now there's different. Each group has its sort of length of training. So for me, it was 10 to 11 years of training and education to receive priestly ordination. And then I was in active ministry for 20 years. In Italy and Ireland and Colombia and South America and Chile. And then also able to serve in the Navy as well as a chaplain. So that's sort of what the commitment, the time commitment of what it means. And then we make, as religious priests, we make vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. You live in community. So there's all these very specific elements. All right, a diocesan priest would make a promise of obedience to his bishop and to the successors. They make a promise of celibacy, and there's no promise or vow of poverty. And they don't live in community. So it's a bit more, well, there's always priestly fraternity, but there's a bit more of an individualistic lifestyle. And so very, very different styles, but living the same broad vocation of what it is, ministerial priesthood, as they'll call it. So yes.
You had 11 to 12 years to decide whether or not this was working for you.
Yeah. Even before I thought after 30 years. So, I was in this for 30 years. So it was like, took me a long time to figure it out. So, but I think we evolve as human beings, and the reasons why we do things. Who knows? I think I jumped on the bandwagon when I was 18. I wanted to do something impactful, meaningful. And also we were sort of trained and educated, and heroism was a big thing. So I want to do something heroic. And so like, this looks very hard. This looks heroic. Right. So this must be my path to be better and to be a saint and to get to heaven. So, and I think if there's one thing was that pull. Another thing then was also sort of, I want to get out of small town New England. Yeah, I don't know what I want to do, but this seems meaningful. So I guess that's what I'll do.
You said New England. Where? Tell me more about this. This is not what I was anticipating.
Massachusetts, small town, 10th of 13 children. Grew up in a very traditional Catholic environment, and very exposed to what I then became, to priests, to nuns, to brothers, to monks. Very exposed to that. Although as a child, it's not something that I ever wanted to do. But I think it was at that sort of, you graduate from high school, and I sort of that pressure you get that you got to figure something out, and I didn't know. So I did some volunteer time, and then I said, all right, well, I feel like this is very sort of, my decision was very obligation driven, in my view. It was sort of like duty driven. I have to serve. I have to do something heroic, something that requires a lot of sacrifice. This looks like that's what that is, and so that's where I'm going to go. But it was also very meaningful. I mean, it's a very transcendental type of mission. So yeah, I got on that train, and I just never looked back for a long time. Not the best example of discernment, right? And in the organization that I've been with, that I was with, went through a huge crisis and renewal and reformation, and where they had to sort of go back over these discernment processes because a lot of people didn't receive the proper accompaniment along the way. And then I was given leadership roles from a very young age. And so when you're given leadership roles, but first of all, you take it as this is an honor that I'm valued. that my skill set, my qualities are valued, but it also gave me less time to do a healthy discernment process.
I wonder how, I think of so many people being driven by the vows they've made, or by the promises they've made, or the commitments that they've made. And even if they're heading directly into a destructive path, they continue moving forward because of those vows. And whether it be being in a community of people that get into trouble, or that hurt each other emotionally and physically, they remain because of the promises that they've made.
Because of the
And
commitment, yeah.
they've made.
Yes, this can happen in marriage, this can happen in religious groups, this can happen in gangs or other types of groups, you know, well, things that may look couldn't happen in the military, you know, things that may look healthy, but there can have some unhealthy underpinnings, or just, but yes, the power of commitment and the power of duty and the power of obligation, also the power of sort of the social element of commitment of, well, you know, what I owe to these people. I made a public commitment, whether it be to a small group, whether it be to another person, whether it be to the church.
Sure. So at some point you decide that the way that you want to contribute to the world is not within the church, and you've moved from that. And at least in my understanding and looking at the kind of work that you do, you work a lot in leadership and directing organizations and having a more just a better environment, more inclusive, more equitable. Can you speak
Yes.
a little bit about that for me?
Of course, yes. So I'm very passionate about the human person. I think that, and so I build on these 30 years of experience, of my love for humanity and for the complex beauty of people. And I just bring it into a different space, different perspective, different approach. But it's, in the end, it's continue to serve people. And it's really to serve people that are in positions of power, authority, leadership, and influence. Because this has been and always will be part of our human experience, whether we like it or not. You know, parentheses is, you know, the younger generation nowadays, there's a lot of, in some countries and cultures in the Western world, there's a sort of a bit of a rejection towards hierarchy and authority and power. Partly because there's a huge emphasis on freedom, and so they see this as a threat to my freedom, but also because power has been used so poorly in so many ways that people like, I don't know, have no time for that. The fact is that it's always part of our human experience. You know, in all the different spaces and environments, even just how we influence the power and authority that we have over ourselves and how we lead ourselves. So it's really working with people in that space, whether it be personal, individual coaching for people that in positions of power, authority, influence, and leadership, or whether it be offering education and workshops and conferences around these topics. And so, because when authority, power, influence, and leadership, when it's used in a healthy way, it's very life-giving. We've all experienced that. But it's when it's used in an unhealthy way or dysfunctional way or to an extreme of toxic way, it's extremely destructive. And when that happens in the context of faith and in the context of family, the destruction is a lot deeper, because in those two contexts, it touches the deeper fibers of who we are as human beings. And so the life-giving leadership in those spaces can be so much more life-giving, but also the destructive, the unhealthy leadership can be ever so much destructive and painful in those spaces. So that's sort of what I do and why I do what I do. And it's not only in the corporate world, it's and to your point, I continue to be part of the church, just a different type of active member than I was before. But my faith continues to be important to me. And so I work with faith-based groups, and not only Catholic, I think, because I think there's a lot of parallels in any faith-based group around how we manage power, authority, influence, and leadership. Also in the corporate space, there's a lot of companies that I work with around leadership coaching. And I want to, and also working with politicians for me is very important because of the influence that they have in society and the power that they are given through being elected officials. And celebrities have a huge influence because of who they are or what they do, right? Whether they have, but oftentimes don't have training and education to manage that influence in such a positive way. So power and authority, it's an influence, it's a sacred thing that we have in our hands. And it's so important that we be trained and educated to use it in an ethical and moral way, because they're all given to us for good. And we can look at history and see that how oftentimes it's been used for bad or for evil. But we all can see how many times it's been used for good. And the more we can do this as human beings, the better we can do this as human beings, well, the better society will be, the better our families will be, the better everybody's going to be.
Because I know there isn't a one step fix all kind of solutions, but when you see kind of educating people on structures and of power and how they influence and impact the people around them, what is one of the first things people need to be aware of when it comes to that type of authority and power?
Self-awareness first and foremost, being aware of themselves, because the more aware we are of ourselves, and self-awareness is a journey, but the more we are working to become more aware of ourselves, then with the greater awareness we're going to use these powers, or this, which is given to us to serve, really. But if we think of people in leadership roles, if they're not self-aware, right, then there's a phrase that I use called the greatest, and self-awareness is the greatest leadership asset. The lack of self-awareness is one of the greatest leadership liabilities. And it's not often spoken of. We often speak about a lot of other types of leadership skills that we work to develop, but this self-leadership is so important in self-discovery, because if we think about, the more blind spots that I have in being in a leadership role, well, the more that's going to affect how I make decisions and how I lead people, how I impact people. We're always going to have blind spots, but it's behooves us, and it's in our best interest, and it's our responsibility and duty to work on ourselves so that we have, as we grow, we have the least amount of blind spots as possible, and that we're always curious to discover or unveil more of those blind spots through our work with others. So that's why, self-awareness, and then I would say humility. Humility is so important, to be grounded in truth, grounded in reality of who I am, and not in sort of these bubbles that we can create for ourselves of what I represent. And no, to be very grounded in who we are and why we are in positions of authority and power. It is not to feed our ego, but it is to serve. It is not to fill a void around my own self-identity, but it is to serve and to build others, organizations, the people around me. Or even when it happens in a family, I talk about leadership in the family, and in that dynamic of couples, that other person. I am supposed to be very good soil where that other person can grow. So to the simple answer to your question is self-awareness first and foremost. And so coaching is, or any type of relationship where it's a confidential one-on-one relationship, whether it be counseling, whether it be therapy, whether it be coaching, whether it be spiritual direction and other types of, or just sort of this very confidential sort of type of friendship that I might have with someone. A space where I can talk about what I'm going through. Because this is part of the ways that how we process as human beings. When we transform, whether it be emotions, whether it be thoughts, whether it be experiences, we transform them into words, into language, and we hear ourselves say things because we take more ownership. They become more real to us. And to the point of the tear, we've all had the experience that we might think something and feel something, but when we say it and we break down in tears, it's just the power of transforming it into language. And that's sometimes what we're afraid of. Now, why do I get very passionate about this topic? Because when in my own journey, I checked into inpatient care, in my crisis, and where I had to learn to do all these things. And I remember that, talking about my story or answering questions where I would break down crying. And it's just that powerful experience of realizing, of hearing myself say things that I've never heard myself say before. And those things becoming very real to me.
Mhm.
And that can be, the tears can be tears of joy, but they can also be, and I'm speaking more of tears of just sort of discovery, tears of discovery, but also some tears of sort of owning the tragedy of where I felt I was in life,
Mm.
by sort of in a very dark spot, and owning that. So in that coaching, in the work that I do, and it's very powerful, and I explain this to clients when we begin, is that part of the power of this experience of how we're wired as human beings is that it's not really what I'm going to do as a coach. I facilitate a process of discovery, but it's you transforming thoughts, experiences, and emotions into words, and hearing yourself say things that you've never heard yourself say before, taking ownership of those things, so that everything and things becoming more real to you, because then you can work with that.
What is, what does self-discovery look like? And then how do you begin that journey? And I think just like getting it out of the mind and into the world by speaking or writing, it seems like that is a necessary step in self-awareness.
Yes.
And how do you see the holes or the gaps or the weaknesses that we have in ourselves when you don't know they're there? How do you find them? That it's by interacting with others and being open to hearing
Mm-hmm.
conversation, what they might see about you. But I don't know. This is just what's coming to my mind as I hear you speak. So is there truth to that? I mean, how do we become more self-aware? How do we acknowledge the things that we're lacking in our lives when we've just been unable to see those things?
Mm-hmm. I think it's being intentional. First of all, we have to want to do it. That in itself is, it's a step of great vulnerability. Because a lot of us can live in that space. Well, I'm doing great. I don't need to work on anything. Especially if we think about people that have been successful in life. They're in, well, they've grown. They've gone up the career ladder or in whatever sector it is, and they're they must be good at what they do if that's where they've gotten to. So what need do they have to uncover things or to work on themselves? As human beings, it's a very vulnerable spot because it's something that we don't want to do because there's can be a lot of fear there. We can be afraid of our own shadows.
Mhm.
And that's a natural human experience. So the less we have to face them, well, the safer we can feel, the more comfortable we can feel. So it's not for the faint of heart. And everyone has people do this to different degrees. Not everyone's called to the same degree of sort of the self-discovery. Some personalities tend more towards it. Some people, as they develop, they lean more into it. There's less people can. Some people can see it as, well, what a waste of time, right? Or people have that glass, which is the full glass. It changes for everyone depending on the size of the glass, sort of thing. So people just have to know what's there, what suits them, but it always has to be there has to be some courage linked to it, right? Not just going along what's comfortable, but what's courageous. Okay, and what will help me grow as a human being, and that's a lifelong journey, but also what will help my surroundings. Because me, by working on myself, by leading myself better, by growing, it's just natural that will have positive consequences on my intimate inner circles, on my professional circles.
Mm.
And I see that every day in people that are working on themselves, even if it's just in a professional sphere, it has direct consequences on their environment of the people that they work with, and positive consequences. So it requires a level of courage, a level of intentionality, and investing time and energy into it. Now, everyone can find different ways to do it. There's not sort of a one size fits all in ways to do it. But the fact is that we're wired for relationships. So speaking, like we said, transforming things into language, whether that be writing, journaling is a big thing, or it can be in personal conversations. It can be through silence, through disconnecting from social media, from distractions, disconnecting from distraction, finding that quiet space. We have a hard time with silence as human beings generally, right? And when that quiet space Our brain wants to fill it with something. So meditation, going on retreats, and there's all different types of retreats to fit different types of personalities. If you like the wilderness, if you like mountains, then there's retreats for that. If you like the fields or the beaches, or if you like monasteries or these silent spots, there's retreats for everybody. All of those are ways to grow in this knowledge of self, and that's what we would call self-awareness. And that requires intentionality, requires an investment of time and oftentimes of money, and it requires great intentionality. As we would say, we never go uphill unintentionally, right? If we can roll downhill unintentionally, but we never go uphill. So, when we take that mountain example, climb a mountain unintentionally, you have to be very intentional. If we think of growth as us human beings, and even the image of a mountain, as you go up, the more visibility you have. That's sort of like personal growth and development. The more I go, the more I'm able to see. And there's a sense of life and a sense of freedom, and there's a sense of, I think, there's wisdom that comes with that.
Absolutely. I really appreciate hearing you articulate it in the way that you do. Yesterday, I celebrated hearing about a job. I was very happy and very proud of myself. And I kept thinking, oh gosh, every day that I've lived, all my errors, all my successes have led to this moment. But it made me think about my errors in life. And I see my kids, I'm spending time with my sons, and I hugged my son, and he said, what's that for, Dad? And I'm sorry that it took so long to grow up, and I'm sorry that all the mistakes I made impacted you. But I hope you understand that we're in a new chapter now, and I've succeeded in a way that the years of struggle paid off, but I know some of that struggle was at your expense. And I don't know if he got it. I don't know if he understood. I think he did. He smiled and was
How old is he?
He's 21 tomorrow.
Yeah.
21 tomorrow.
I think is that an age where he can understand little pieces of it. As he gets a little bit older, he'll understand it more. Such a great relationship. As your children get older, that adult relationship that you can have with them.
Yeah. No,
as they become more independent, and there's so much teaching, and part of it is around this, is owning your humanity, right? Owning the mistakes, because we sort of, when the kids are younger, they see dad and mom as, they're just perfect individuals, like
whoops.
heroes, and then they begin to discover as they grow up, and then all of a sudden they're the worst, and then as they get, they're my greatest enemies, and then as you get older, then you begin to see, oh wow, there's so much to learn from each other. And I think that was so vulnerable and honest of you to take that moment, to see where you were at, and so, wow, this is such a blessing of where I'm at in life, and after so much effort that I've been able to get to this, I wouldn't call it a culminating moment, but just to this very bright moment where that it seems like everything begins to fall into place.
Right.
And you're able to look back and notice so many efforts and so much really work and fighting and determination, but also the tripping and falling along the way. And that affects the people around us. And sometimes we can think, people in leadership roles, or whether it be parenting or other leadership roles, they can be very afraid to own their mistakes, because it's almost like, oh, it's not allowed to say that I made a mistake. No, it's so important, because you give those people that you lead also permission to make mistakes and to own their mistakes. Right? There's always a place and there's a way to do it. But yes, so I think your son, you gave him a window into your humanity, which I think is a beautiful thing to do. So thank you for doing that.
There's so many, when I looked at all the things that you do and the topics that you speak on in the workplace and in the world, it made me think, oh, I want to talk about this and I want to talk, but I know we would be here all day. And
Right.
So one question that comes to mind that I try to ask every guest that I have is, you see yourself in this position where you have every resource financially, you have the people to back you, the strength that you you thought you didn't have, you find everything you need. What change would you make in this world that you think would have the most impact on the entire world?
That's a very good question, Fernando.
I'm sorry I didn't prepare you with it.
That's right. No, no, it's always good to get people on the fly. You get the honest, not the prepared answer, just the gut honest answer. If you know, if I was in the position, I would. It comes down to the dignity of the human person, and there's a lot there to unravel. But which is the dignity of the human person in all of its manifestations, and the importance of family. Because I think if we could get these two things right or better, whether it be as a country or as a world, there's a positive domino effect on so many other things. You know, and I say, first of all, the dignity of the human person, because I think it's also a journey to this discovery of the beauty of people in all of their manifestations. And all you have to do is go through history and see where that wasn't valued or wasn't seen, right? Whether it be classes, whether it be skin color, whether it be cultures, where there is always some sort of sense of superiority, and not just around just the beauty of people for who they are. And then the family, because there's two things that the most people will do in their life is they'll be in a committed relationship and they may be a parent. And those are two things that we really don't prepare ourselves to do. To be really good and functional in relationships and to be the best parents that we can be. When we look at just the way the social society works, we're expected to get educated for this job. We have to get certifications and licenses and all these things are expected. And then when you get a new job or you have to go through all this training, there's always mandatory training for everything. But for the two of the most important things that we're going to do in life, there's no mandatory training for. So I think we can do better. I think government can do better around this to really support people and to support relationships and to support families. And government can be better. Social structures can be better.
Mhm.
So those would be the two things that I would focus on.
Yeah, definitely. I think dignity and both strong families. I think that so many of us would live mentally healthier lives. And so I hope that enough people can align to support families and to provide that dignity that we need as individuals that are contributing to a community.
Sure.
And that's where the human connection, and it's much more difficult to be cruel to somebody that's standing in front of you because you see yourself in them, or at least I hope you do. You see a reflection of yourself in the people that you interact with. But when it's done digitally, and forgive us for being on Zoom,
Right.
it becomes easier to be hurtful. And so I know that's the dignity part of it and the family part of it. I think those are two very essential components of life. And I don't necessarily mean that it has to be the biological family.
No. Right. But I think yes, two essential elements, and I think we have to improve the role models that we have in society, and this goes across countries and cultures. Just people with so much visibility that they use words so irresponsibly. And the way we manage information, the way we speak about each other, the way we speak to each other, and whether it be celebrities, whether it be in politicians, we can do so much better as human beings. And I do want to highlight something. You know, you're from Ventura County, and you have the Family Justice Center, which is such a transcendental and important mission, and I think can be really become a lighthouse and a point of reference for so many other counties and states across our country because of the work that they're doing around family. I would almost, that's not my place to change names, but Family Justice Center, but also the Family Development Center. I think, you know, around those two things, it's so important. So I really just wanted to highlight that because that's where you are. Maybe some of the people that will be listening to this, that's where they're located. And so it's such a great initiative that's being done there that deserves a lot of support and will do so much good for the community.
I recently interviewed Jennifer Barbatini,
Uh-huh.
and she works with support animals, and she spoke very highly of the Family Justice Center. And one thing that I acknowledged, or at least it came to mind, is that when we reach a point where our life is in total array and maybe we're feeling depressed, or maybe we've just been the victim of abuse or what have you, we're not in a state where we can go and search for things and clearly. So being aware that the Family Justice Center exists and is there and is a resource for, I can't even believe how many things are offered. I cannot list them all off the top of my head. So
Right.
I'll definitely add more information at the end of this podcast, and hopefully people can see that if they're struggling, there are people that are to support them in many different ways.
Yes.
Thank you for mentioning that.
Fernando, thank you. And thank you for having me on your show
Thank
and
you.
sharing me with your audience.
Absolutely. I feel I don't like using the word, but sometimes it's just appropriate. I feel blessed to have been introduced to you and have the opportunity to meet you and listen. So thank you for your time.
Oh, but thank you. Yeah, we could thank Nicole for the introduction and for this opportunity. I think the blessings go both ways. So thank you very much, Fernando.
If you or someone you know is experiencing suicidal thoughts, please call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. For victims of child abuse, domestic violence, or sexual assault, you can get help at the Safe Harbor inside the Family Justice Center by calling 805-652-7655. All services are free of charge and confidential. Addiction is treatable. Recovery from drug and alcohol problems start with a call or an email. For Ventura County Behavioral Health Substance Use Treatment Access Line, call 844-385-9200 or email sudservicesventura.org.